Good evening, viewers. This is your host, Dr. Gicharu Githere, coming to your homes with another session of Mazungumzo. This time we are dealing with Hegel, but as usual, we start with a bit of music. During this pandemic, you are looking for something just to lighten up the feelings, and moods. Wear your mask, keep distance, wash your hands, Meet as fewer people as possible, not because you're not social, because of the pandemic. And as usual in this program, where we're looking at Hegel, but there we start with light music, Hegel and otherness, but we will get to that. And here I have a song, Museto Atano, before Museto, the GMO, artificial, genetically modified seed before they came to countries like Kenya, in Gatanga, Mugumoine, when things like beans or sugarcane really was sweet and really original from the seeds of our forefathers. But nowadays, the maize, so flat, no sugar. Moseto atanoka henderia minji shiashamagata minji nakewa gegashama tangogoyo. Moseto atanoka henderia nyina wa jeri dibora ahei aigagira mbegu cia kuhanda kimera kiu kingi gioka agakorwo ena mbegu igire hau ikumbi cia kuhanda. Museto atanoka henderia barabara ya Gatanga yoiraga rukungu tambura yakimakia yakinya gitama makamuria kaiwe haka deriga nake akamera runi rukungu rwa Gatanga Mugumoine. Museto atanoka henderia minji shiashamagata minji nakewa gigashama tangogoyo kanauke. Museto atanoka henderia ya kimakia ya kinyaga Nairobi akinya haurwathia kirindi kamoria kaiwe hakathiriga nake akamera uyu tithiriga roro ni rukungu rwa Gatanga Mugumoine. Museto atanoka henderia minji shiashamagata minji nakewa gigashama tauke. Museto atanoka henderia dibora nyina wanjeri eigagira mbegu hau ikumbi kuhanda riria kimera gioka kimera kingi. Museto atanoka Endere ya minji shiasha maga taminji Nakewa gigasha matango goyo kana oke Museto atanoka Endere ya kiwa ya shamaga tauke Taminji gigasha mata shukari Museto atanoka. Now we get into serious business of analyzing Hegel, consciousness and sense certainty. Hegel looks at salt, a very good component because salt is essential for taste, good palatable food. And he looks at three characteristics of when a human being acquires consciousness. He looks at salt and he notices that salt is white. Salt is white. White is a predicate. So he's developing language of how to define objects. Is white, predicate. So that is the essence of acquiring consciousness, is language. And also salt is made of cubicles and is tart to the taste. And he sees a contradiction, also dialectics in salt. Tartness has positiveness and negativeness. So there's tart 1 and tart 2. That's the building of consciousness. Tartness has its conscious dialectically opposed to inner and outer inherent characteristics. So as salt looks at itself, it has this element of contradiction, dynamics. Matter has dialectics within itself in Hegel's thinking. So even you can see Nkrumah, when he wrote Consciousism, it's basically matter acquires life. Matter is a living thing and it has its dialectics. Also, all three characteristics of salt, whiteness, cubicalness, tartness, all the above are also in a dialectical state with themselves and with each other. Actually, I have it there. Another example of dialectical state of salt is when it approaches its daily utilities, which is saltness, as it relates to the edibles. So you can imagine salt looking at stew. Salt is used for salting stew. Its existence is challenged when food appears in the dialectics of existence. So you can see the ego of salt is actually negated when the food comes into picture. The self-existence of salt is challenged. Itself for itself. And these are very important aspects of how language helps somebody to come into that kind of mind abstractions and analysis, determinateness. That comes as a result of the mind and thinking of human beings. That's how consciousness is achieved. And for example, this is vis-a-vis the indigenous people. Do you think the indigenous people in their oral traditions went through this? Definitely they did. Once you have language, you go through this kind of abstraction. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter you're living in Australia and the prisoners who are taken there by the British haven't arrived to finish the whole population of a place like Tasmania, of the indigenous people. They had a language. They knew salt before the coming of the colonizers. But that's another subject. And there is this self-same concept, the manifold of self-same, many aspects of consciousness. Insofar as comes in when salt looks at sugar. Insofar as salt doesn't have any challenge about cubicalness, whiteness, and any tartness or sweetness. Now, that is another thing, is survival. As far as is for another. Sensible mode of existence is replaced by universal, for salt to relate with sugar at a level of objects as found in themselves. Unconditioned absolute universality, pure characteristics of salt, tart, white, and cubical. Here they move from sense state to universal, because sense certainty is the pure consciousness. The salt is somewhere sitting in situ in a lake. It has not been discovered. The human being have not found the value of salt. So is in a sense certainty, until it is discovered by the senses that it makes food taste palatable. Then it comes to a universal state. Essential nature here is universal, not genuine, for it is conditioned by sense, not entirely universal. So it lacks the genuine self-identification universality. Self yet is universal, but it has not been discovered by human beings that we can go to Timbuktu, travel all the way from Europe to get salt and take it as a valuable thing to towns in Europe. So when salt gets its value, there has to be something which makes it get the value. The human being has got to acquire a certain kind of, the essential nature of salt is a consciousness thing. It's a kind of an education of an individual, discovery, innovation. The human beings develop. And this comes from, Hegel looks at it from a very abstract format. He says there are two aspects in consciousness. There is force, which Richard wrote in his book, The Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature, is assertiveness of ideas, the force. Like reason, a force is one of the aspects of human beings to get where they want. Then there is understanding, which is also an abstract. It's a process. Force is a process. But they're different processes. One is abstract and one is physical force. But also at the element of consciousness, force is necessary for you to acquire a certain knowledge. So, in the dialectics of consciousness, there is the ability to use force. Force is self-conditioned principle of unity. Salt, to be salt, has to have tartness, whiteness, cubicalness, and it has to stick together. There has to be a force. The information of salt, there is a scientific kind of force for the combination of that to come together. There's a kind of force allowing it to stay intact and be termed as salt. Expression of force, the unity evolves the differences out of itself. In the realm of force, there is the element of understanding. Like force, understanding is self-conditioned process. Also, force is self-conditioned process because it comes from gravity. Whether you like it or not, there is a force applied onto you, applied onto the environment by nature itself. Understanding allows consciousness to do analysis of entities like tightness, whiteness, and cubicalness and try to make sense of them. So you see, understanding, once it is acquired, to comprehend to comprehend the work of force and understanding, one has to decipher the role of unconditioned universal salt in its natural state. I said before, salt acquired its value in that it makes food tasty and it is necessary for digestion and all these kind of things. Somebody had to understand its utility when it came to taste, food, mind, and understanding using perception. The salt's characteristic became clear, phenomena and noumena at play in this stage. That is interesting because you see, the understanding is of these concepts and entities is an element of phenomena. The aspect of mind being able to solve and see clearly these abstract things in front of it. Phenomena. Noumena is things as they are in their natural state. Noumena. Newamenya. Funny enough, sounds like a cool language. The entities of salt at universal stage holding to qualify the scrutiny of understanding. So the understanding, as an individual gets understanding. This is actually Kantian. Immanuel Kant went through these things of how you acquire knowledge. A perception, concept, intuition, understanding, ideas, thought, until you get to know a thing. That's the acquisition of knowledge. It will come later, but also Hegel, as he discusses this aspect of salt, he's also borrowing from Immanuel Kant because he had read him. So Hegel does not exist independently of other philosophies that were there. That's why I'm telling you, otherness is so much built into the philosophy of the West, and you can never separate them. Bondage and freedom, serfhood and lords. You can see there is that dialectics. Even individuals have to depend on masters in the European kind of thinking. And this is what I'm trying to get at. Understanding helps in analyzing of universalness of salt and identifying its characteristics and possibilities of. That's this called of kingdom of laws, the universal laws. In a world brought to light, phenomena and noumena. Phenomena not clear or obvious to the eye or the mind. So it has got to be analyzed. Noumena, it is a thing for itself. It's just there. The individual has not acquired or wanted to acquire consciousness. Noumena exists at that level. A thing as it is to itself, not just in its appearance only. Self-consciousness, universal, is taken over from consciousness, sense certainty, and has acquired understanding, able to analyze salt and decipher its characteristics. So you can see consciousness is like a tool. It's a living thing. And this is how Hegel looks at it. So you yourself, if you are ready enough, and you have read things like Afrocentrism by Molefier Center, and the aspect of oral tradition and memory. And you have read somebody like David Forer, F-R-O-E-R. Here is a beautiful book about memory. And memory, he actually arrives at a point where he kind of shows that memory is more important than intelligence. So that one helps the traditional indigenous people, because in their oral tradition, memory is a very important aspect. Language allows us, as we build predicates and we define objects in the environment, we can actually store them in memory. You don't have to have written things down. If you have got good memory, you can survive. Actually, you can survive. The only thing to spread information more, when it is in written form, you can send a letter from Nairobi to Kinshasa. But how do you send memory? You got to go there. Before the recording, digital things were there, both analog and digital. You could not use memory very effectively for communication and marketing and distribution. So those are the limitations when you're using memory. Sometimes face-to-face becomes very important. But at the same time, you can now forward what I'm saying, forward, until we have gadgets which could help memory be stored in digital format. Then you could send it as I'm sending these things to you now. So until we meet again, this is your host, Gicharu Githere, and the subject of Hegel and the subject of others or otherness. Until then, ciao ciao.